My name is Daniel Wilson. I'm the Director of Policy and Program Development for the National Caucus and Center on Black Aged. Today we host a first in a series of African American caregivers forums. The goal of these forums are to educate caregivers on things that they can utilize that will help them to sort of delineate from some of the trials and tribulations that they go through on a daily basis as caregivers. The title of the program was African American Caregivers Symposium. The morning consisted of a series of speakers followed by 3 panels. The first panel had discussion by Dr. John Thompson, the Executive Director of the DC Office on Aging, and he talked about the DC Caregivers Institute. The second presenter was Mrs. Sherry Clark, who is with the Administration for Community Living, and she talked about resources that are available to caregivers that you can find online, such as the elderlocator.gov. Then we had Cliff Porter, who is the Government Affairs Vice President for HRC Manor Care, and he talked about what to look for when looking to place your loved one into a skilled care facility.
3 years ago, I was in Chicago for a conference, and while I was there, I asked the people who were helping me kind of set up my visit if I could meet with some family caregivers. And so they assembled a group of about 20 or 25, maybe 20 family caregivers. And I said, I just want to meet with them by myself. I don't want to take a bunch of staff. I just want to go talk directly to family caregivers. So we set this up, and as I was going into the room, I could hear the staff for the medical center whispering to each other about the caregivers. They don't know what she's coming for. They don't know why she's here. They don't know what to say. So I could tell that this group of people were kind of not quite sure why this Washington person was coming to see them and what they should say. So I went in and asked them one question, and we talked for an hour. And the one question with a group of family caregivers was this: did you become a family caregiver overnight? Or has this been just something that's evolved in your lifetime? There are 3 people from that meeting, that hour, that I have always remembered, and I wanted to share with you something about those 3 people. One person was a gay man who came out as gay, and he was talking about caring for his partner. And he said, you know, he's my sweetie, not my patient. And this has always stuck with me because family caregiving really is about family. And it's about how the roles change as someone needs care and how you still protect that person's dignity and independence and the relationship that you have, while there's also a different need for care that family members provide. And how we can do this in a way that's respectful of the person who needs the care as well as the family caregiver, kind of honors that work and that commitment and that love, but not turn this into a doctor-patient clinical relationship. These are families, and it's always stuck with me. He's my sweetie, not my patient. And so how do I preserve a healthy relationship when there's a dependency? The second person who talked to me was a Hispanic American woman who was talking about, she was rushed, you could tell. She'd come in on her lunch break, and she had 2 jobs. And somehow she was providing, I don't actually remember who in her family she was providing care for. I think it was her husband. And it really, resonated with me, again, the financial burden that many people undertake when they are called upon or agree to provide care for someone else. And she was trying to make ends meet and provide support and do 2 jobs at the same time. The third woman that I always remember, who just in some way stunned and worried me, was an African American woman who was caring for her sister with no help. I mean, you ever hear someone tell a story that you just go, oh my God, I don't know how you do this. She talked about working all week, and on Friday she would go home to care for her sister, and she would not leave the house all weekend until she went to work on Monday. Now this is not a good situation. This is not good for the caregiver because of caregiver burnout and stress, and she's her own person, has her own life. It's actually not good for her sister to be so isolated with one other person. What that kind of 2 people need are supports, community supports, and other resources that can come in and give them a break, provide them some help, because you absolutely have, in this case, someone who's willing to care and love for her sister, but who needs help. And that's where we all come in. How can we provide this kind of help? And what resources are available to people? The 3 people all were different racial and ethnic backgrounds that I talked to, all talking about the struggle of caregiving, and all needing help in a way that's very similar, but also very specific to their particular communities and cultures, and how you can call upon sort of the rest of the resources in their lives. So family caregiving really spans all the generations, all these different complexities, and very much what people have in common is a need to know about what resources are there and how can we help. The goal that the government has is to help people keep doing this as they choose to do this and provide kind of access to information.
If you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd just like to take some time to read a brief passage from a book. Until you go through it, no one really understands the potential demands of caring for a loved one. Caregiving is a complex job. It can involve some combination of all the following: helping with bathing, dressing, and toileting, household chores like cooking, shopping, paying bills, doing laundry, giving direct medical care, anything from dressing changes to giving medicines, and providing companionship, since having an illness can be an isolating experience. Because of these many responsibilities, caregivers can become overwhelmed so easily. It helps to be as prepared as possible for this very important job, taking care of your own self as well as someone else. That passage is actually from an upcoming book that I just finished writing called "Excuse Me, Doctor, I've Got What? Taking Ownership of Your Health and Your Healthcare Experience." It's a guide for individuals and their caregivers so that they can get their healthcare needs met by a system that, unfortunately, we know can be very unfriendly at times. So my story continues with my mom. She started showing signs of memory loss shortly after my dad passed away in 2002. We found out the diagnosis was dementia, and I'm sure some of you are here who have loved ones who have dementia. You know that it's very tricky. It can really make your loved one change right in front of you, sometimes in a very unpredictable way. With my mom, it's actually been a very slow progression. It wasn't really until about 5 years ago that it became apparent to everyone, herself included, that she kind of needed to be closer to one of the children in her family, one of her children. And so I was sort of the best choice, so she moved from Virginia Beach up here to Washington, D.C. When someone who's close to you gets ill, it raises a whole series of issues for the family. And I've kind of conveniently divided them into two buckets, the practical and the emotional. On the practical side, it's really one of the things is dealing with the medical reality of the situation. What kind of doctor do we need? What are the options for treatment? What are the side effects from the treatment? What about clinical trials? Are there alternative treatments? We've gotten a lot of help from the Alzheimer's Association, a lot of great information, things that I didn't know about. And I also felt that those types of issues should be captured in one location, which is one thing that led me to write the book, so it would be a resource for families to turn to. The next is the physical reality of the situation. How do we get Ma to give up her house? Where will she live that's safe? How do we help her on a daily basis, and who will do that? How do we know when it's unsafe for her to drive? And then the next is the financial and legal issues. How do we afford this? Is there long-term care insurance? Is it too late to get it? What type of care can she afford without it? Do we know what her wishes are? And then, as if those practical questions aren't enough, there are also the emotions of the situation. And the first was dealing with my own emotions. The next was dealing with how my mother was coping with it. She had her own feelings of loss of independence, her isolation from her circle of friends, adapting to a new and unfamiliar environment here in DC with a worsening illness. The next is dealing with my brothers and sisters who don't live here, making sure that they stay informed about her care and the changes in her personality and what she's able to do, so that they can work alongside me and stay informed. Now, when that didn't happen, and it didn't happen, I wasn't always good about that, some of the worst arguments in our adult life happened, and it really taught me the need to be communicative. And then lastly, the effect on my relationship with my husband. I'm fortunate in that I have a supportive husband who really never made me feel guilty in any way about the extra time that I had to spend with my mom. And I would really say that my biggest challenge is not bringing home the stress of caregiving to the relationship, and his biggest challenge is recognizing when I do. I just want to close by saying that as caregivers, we've taken on a huge task, and it might seem daunting, but it's important to remember one thing, that one person caring about another is really one of life's greatest values. Thank you very much.
I want to quickly talk about the programs of the ADRC. We have what we call an options counseling program. So this is a program, we call it long-term care options counseling. So whether you're a caregiver or whether you're a senior and you're just concerned about your future, is an opportunity of calling our office, and we have social workers. And my staff know this about me. We want to run an agency that is none other, or not like any other governmental agencies, if you will. So if we get a call from a senior or from a caregiver saying, hey, my mother needs assistance, we will come to your house the same day to provide that assistance. And so what do I mean by that? If we're trying to figure out about this loved one, she goes into the hospital or he goes into the hospital, where do they go for care afterwards? That is a big question. I'll give you a good example. I have a cousin who's well into her 80s in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She suffered a stroke a couple of years ago and went into, of course, the hospital, was in ICU for a while, stabilized, left there, and went into a rehab facility. And my parents live in Columbia, South Carolina, and I would ask them, and I always call her Miss Delphine, how's Miss Delphine doing? She's doing better. She's able to speak again. And months go by, I asked my dad again, how's Miss Delphine doing? She's okay. Is she out the rehab facility yet? No, she's still in that rehab facility. And so the light bulb came on for me. I worked at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and I do understand that CMS doesn't like to pay for rehab services forever. I know that much. And so I asked my dad, you sure she's there at a rehab facility? So he finally gave me the name of this facility. It was called the Carolinas Rehabilitation Facility. I looked it up on CMS's website and realized Carolinas Rehabilitation Facility is a nursing home. This is the issue that I have. It's very easy to get somebody into a nursing home. And one thing that Mayor Gray and I have discussed on countless occasions, we want to keep people from going into nursing homes prematurely. I mentioned this story about my cousin because my cousin 2 years later is still in this nursing facility. My job is to be the expert on the issue, and I'm struggling in getting her out of the facility. So that's why you have what we call the State Unit on Aging or the Area Agency on Aging, or better yet, the ADRC, Aging and Disability Resource Center. Our job is to provide that options counseling, be able to advocate, be able to stand up when necessary, but we don't tell folks what to do. Our job is just to empower our consumers with information, empower our customers with information, and they can make the right decision about options counseling. Do I return home to receive rehabilitation service? Do I go into a nursing home on a short-term stay basis? And if I do go on a short-term stay basis, will I get out in a reasonable amount of time? Or do I go home and be an outpatient at a rehab facility? And who's going to coordinate home and community-based services for me? So these are the things that caregivers must think about when they're caring for someone. And so again, our office, the Aging and Disability Resource Center, our number is 202-724-5622. Our job is to step in and to provide assistance. We don't dictate, we just empower our consumers with information for you all to make the most informed decision for yourself and for that loved one.
I was asked to speak today basically about resources that are available on the internet and other places to assist caregivers who are trying their best to juggle their own lives and the lives of their loved ones. There is a lot of information on the internet, as we know, and I think of this commercial, I can't remember what it's for, but this lady's waiting for somebody to come pick her up, and she says, everything on the internet is true, and we know that's not the case. So I think my job here today was just to point out some resources that are available on the internet that are trusted resources. The resources that I'll talk about today are not the only resources that are trusted. It's just a few to get you started, because it can be daunting when you're out here trying to find information. I think the first point I would like to raise here today is you don't have to pay for information. That there is a lot of information available free of charge. So if somebody's trying to charge you just to for them to give you information, you know, you need to really just move on, because between the resources that Dr. Thompson talked about at the Administration on Aging, that we fund a national network of states and area agencies around the country. These are resources that you can go and get information free of charge. The law requires that states and area agencies on aging provide information and assistance to anyone who calls for information. But I'm just going to take a few minutes just to talk about a few of the websites. But I wanted to bring that point up because I know Ms. Winley talked a little bit this morning, but I'm not sure if she really talked about the fact that there are free resources around the country. Because although you may be a caregiver here, your parent or your loved one may be in another state. So Dr. Thompson provides wonderful resources for people who live right here in the District of Columbia, but you may have a relative who lives in Virginia, you may have a relative who lives in Carolinas or some other place. So you need to know that there are resources around the country similar to that they are here right here in the district. The first website I'm going to talk about is Alzheimer's.gov. Now I do have a handout, so you don't have to worry about writing all this down, which has the websites and everything on it. So what I'm just going to basically just talk a little bit about what each of these websites can provide. In 2011, President Obama signed the National Alzheimer's Project Act. And the president signed this act saying that it's time to do a lot more work around Alzheimer's disease. It's time to accelerate trials, it's time to make treatment options. But within that act, he also says we need to do more public education and outreach around Alzheimer's disease. So there was a national campaign around the disease which had media ads and other information. And one of the outcomes was a website, Alzheimer's.gov, which was meant to be the definitive place on the web you could go to get information around Alzheimer's disease that the government could provide. So you do have the ability to call the Alzheimer's Association 24/7, and they do have master's level specialists and counselors who can provide that assistance. And then their website also has a specific section directly for caregivers to provide some tips.
As we stated earlier, you know, there's this distinction between a rehab facility and a nursing facility. And it's an important distinction. And I think the most important thing that you have to first conclude is, what does your loved one need? You have to understand what they need. If the issue is they fell, they broke their hip, and they need rehabilitative services, then guess what? The reality is they need a rehabilitation facility, ultimately get the best rehab that they can get so they can go back home. It's that simple. So choosing any facility to provide rehab services isn't a smart approach. You've got to think about what my family member or loved one needs, and from there go shopping. Now, if any of you are like me or like my wife, when you go shopping, it's a fairly specific endeavor. You're going to look for something. If it's shoes, if for me a television set, I'm going somewhere and I'm looking specifically for what it is that I want. And that principle applies as it relates to healthcare choices. And I think in many cases what we do based on the stress of the situation, many times we just advocate the due diligence to others. And that's just because in most cases we weren't prepared. The site Medicare.gov and Nursing Home Compare provides a resource to help you determine some key indicators as it relates to your child. Now, one point I like to make is, I don't know about you all, but when it comes to my mama or my dad, I want them to have the best, and I know that's the case for all of us. And all too often, we make decisions based on geography, right? So what we do is we go to the place that's 5 minutes, what places are 5 minutes around my house? And that's what drives the decision, okay? Or what's 5 minutes from my job? And that's okay to start, as long as you're getting the best you can get based on that location. But I would encourage you to ignore location first. Don't start there. And you start and you look at certain key indicators first. Know what your loved one needs. Once you've identified what they need, then look and see what facilities provide those services and do it well. So, when it comes to questions, there are certain things that you really need to focus on. If your family member needs rehabilitative services, I always say the first question I always like to ask the facility, my mom fell and broke their hip. How long does it take for your average patient to go home? That's a real simple, all-encompassing question that kind of tells it all. How long does it take them to go home? Because guess what? They want to go home. So for me, if someone is successful getting me home in 12 days, whereas others say it's going to take 3 months, they can show me they can get me home in 12 days, guess where I'm going to be? The place that can get me home in 12 days. So you want to ask the question, and when I say successfully, that means according to the plan of care that's established. The second question is, if they can't answer that question and they say they don't measure it, cross it off the list. Because you have to manage what you measure and measure what you manage. And if you're not measuring that, and that's one of the most important indicators, forget it. Just cross them off your list and move on. So they ought to be able to provide you some answers in that regard. The next question I ask is always ask about staff stability. That's a very, very important measure to ask. And when I say that, you simply ask what's the average tenure of your nursing employees? What is the average tenure of your management staff? The next is, are there permanent assignments? As it relates to the caregivers, are they permanently assigned to a certain group of patients? Very important question. And the reason that question is important is because that nursing staff has to get to know their patients. And if I'm assigned very different places, I'm not going to really get to know the nuances of that patient. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to know if they don't seem quite right today. They're not acting right today. Normally, Miss So-and-so is very kind, and now she's acting out. She's always acting out. Or now she's walking with a slower gait. Something has transpired. If you have permanent assignments, you have individuals that can distinguish those differences and ultimately make sure that your loved one gets the very best care. Also understand that in your mind, and it's a truth, nobody's gonna care for your mother like you do, or your father like you, period. They are not. They're not, because they don't know them like you, and they don't love them like you. But guess what? It's a job to take care of them. It's your job to humanize your mom or your dad, so that they understand that they are caring for somebody that's important to somebody else. And when you do that, and you do that effectively, and you are your loved one's advocate, the likelihood of them getting good care is very high.
The second panel consisted of resources that are available for caregivers, and we had Reverend Joan McCarley with the People's Community Baptist Church, and she talked about the caregivers ministry at the church that was started. Then we had attorney Michael Breeds, who talked about the legal aspects of caregiving, what tools and documents are needed to be an effective caregiver. Then we had Mrs. Lynn McGuire talk about the importance of pre-planning your funeral and leaving wishes that would be known to others, and she's with McGuire Funeral Services.
Pastor was compassionate enough to allow the establishment of the caregivers ministry. People just like today came out of the woodwork who had relatives at home, because it's usually a relative, who needed care. People came out of the woodwork who were overwhelmed because they were working. They had children, but still they were ending up being the caregiver. I often say when people say, well, how do you plan to become a caregiver because it happens at a certain age? It's something you can't plan for. My other sister in the vignette video, my other sister, in one day's time, I find again that I'm a caregiver because that sister is sick at this time. and we trust God that she will be well, but she is very sick. And so caregiving is a part of life. As the phrase says, it's what's going on while we're planning. Okay, life is what happens while we're making other plans. And that's the situation you find yourself in. I heard the doctor say this morning that you need to, I think you said something about you need to stop and think when it happens. Or anyway, I'm paraphrasing, but the thought that I got from something that you said was that we as caregivers need to be patient. We have to end up being patient with those for whom we provide care, and be patient with ourselves, patient with the systems that are put in place to provide for care and for caregivers, patient with our relatives and our friends who want to help, and sometimes their help is helpful, and other times their help is helping them and it's overwhelming. Patience because we have to also be concerned for our own health. And these are the things that in the caregiver ministry, we had an opportunity to bring people together where there was a freedom to let go and to be able to talk and to express what was really being felt. Caregivers many times, they do what is necessary to be done. And they don't have the time, nor do they take the time to talk about really what's going on in the inside. They just kind of cave in and cave out after it's all done. And the Caregivers Ministry gave an opportunity that was a safe place, confidential, where those who never get to give the actual heart-to-heart truth of what's going on and how they feel had that opportunity to express it.
The most effective strategy to ensure the ability to immediately care for a person as soon as a crisis occurs is to have a revocable living trust in place and an advance medical directive. And that has to obviously be put in place while the person is still capable and before any crisis occurs. Since we generally don't know when a crisis is going to befall us, the time for each of us to do that is now. If you don't have a power of attorney, if you don't have a revocable trust, if you don't have a medical advance directive, after you leave here, you should make arrangements to get one. Okay? And hopefully you'll get home safe enough so you can do that. Just saying. And this is true not only of the legal aspects of caregiving, but I think that's a common theme throughout all of these areas, whether it's insurance or long-term care insurance, if it's finding alternative housing, where you can't really wait, sometimes you're forced to wait, but it's best not to wait until somebody is in dire need or they're losing their mental capacity to suddenly then move them to another situation, into a different housing situation. A lot of times that makes it more debilitating for that person doing that move. The living trust can also act as your final last will and testament, or what a will would do. A will itself does have to go through the court process of probate that takes in different jurisdictions, it takes different amount of time, anywhere from 6 months to 9 months to a year or more. And it generally can cost about 4% of the value of the estate. The revocable trust not only takes care of you while you're alive but incapacitated, but it can also act as a will and avoid that whole probate process, so that upon your death, your person you've named to be in charge has immediate control of your assets, can take care of your final bills, and distribute the assets according to your wishes without having to go through the court process. And basically, once you've got to the point where all your documents are in place, you can make sure that communicate with everybody where they are, who you've appointed, and so that everything can go smoothly from there. An interesting development that is occurring now with the internet and doing sort of financial banking online is that some people now don't have their bank statements coming to their house. They do everything online. and they have a password to get into their accounts, and that's how they receive their information. Now, in the old days, when someone passed away, we'd tell them, well, wait for the mail to come in, see what their statements are, go through their desk drawer, we find what their assets are, and we can find everything. If everything is online with passcode protection, we don't even know about it. And it may go undetected and eventually be given to the state. So you want to make sure, if you are doing that type of banking too, that you do trust somebody. Let them know where your password is, let them know what your assets are, so that they would be able to have access to those accounts if you become incapacitated or upon your death.
I'll start out by saying, I started with this: people get ready, there's a game coming, and be prepared. I know many of you remember Curtis Mayfield, there's a train coming, but I'm talking about a game, and let me tell you what I mean by game. Once there were two brothers, and the two brothers were avid baseball fans. Just loved baseball from little kids. Growing up, they went to Griffith Stadium. Some of you remember Griffith Stadium, to watch the Homestead Braves, I think it was. And then they moved on to watch the Senators. They played baseball. They had season tickets. They took their daughters and sons to games. And eventually they made a pact between them. And they said, listen, brothers, let's promise one another that whichever one dies first will come back to tell the other whether or not there's baseball in heaven. So they agreed. They said, okay, we can keep that. Well, years passed, and eventually the younger brother died. So the older brother said, well, there's some consolation because I hope there's baseball in heaven, but I'll wait because I know Big Brother's going to come back to let me know. Well, a year passed. Big Brother hadn't returned. Year and a half went by, no Big Brother. 2 years went by. He said, I wonder if he forgot our pact. Come on, he couldn't have. Well, about 6 months later, the younger brother showed up. The little brother said, man, I thought you'd forgotten me. He said, no, I'm going to hold true to our pact. He said, but I've got good news and bad. So the other brother said, well, what's the good news? Good news is there's baseball in heaven. He said, oh, what a relief. But what could the bad news be? He said, little brother, you scheduled to pitch in tonight's game. So there's a game coming. So be prepared for the game because you don't know when that game is coming. You might say to them, well, what I need to do? Number one, you need to tell someone what you want and give it to them. You need to give it to them. And often have you heard this? Everything you need is in the file. I've written it down. Does it sound familiar? Yes. It does no good when it's in a locked file. Or where in the file do I look? If it's locked and I don't have the key, I can't get to it. Often people put them in a safe deposit box. That's not such a good idea either, unless the person has access to your safe deposit box. You as a caregiver or a neighbor or even a child, if your name is not on that, you can't gain access. So you don't have the information that you need. It's not quickly available to you. And many times, once the person is passed, you need the information quickly. Okay, here, next slide. Sorting through a mountain of papers for the needed documents or information can really hamper the process of making funeral arrangements, just the simple things. If you don't have some basic information, the next slide, some of the basic information that you would need, the caregivers need to find out who is your next of kin. In the event of death, whom should we contact? Because many jurisdictions require that the next of kin respond, not a neighbor, not a caregiver, unless that person is legally designated as such. But I have had instances where no one knows, well, who's their next of kin? I know they don't have a spouse. We don't know if they have children. Do they have siblings? Whom should we contact? They don't know. So you should make those persons known. Your clients, your patients for whom you care, need to tell you, well, if something happens to you, Mr. So-and-so, who's your next of kin? And what is their relationship? And ask them while they have the capacity to tell you. I think that's a point that you're making. It makes no sense if they can't give you accurate information. Ask now so it is on file. So, be ready, plan ahead, because you never know when you may be called to pitch in tonight's game.
In our third panel, we had a demonstration done by Verizon with Patty as she talked about the Sure Response system, and then closing remarks were given by Carol Creasy, who is also with the Administration for Community Living.
So this device is programmed to call only one number, and it's a number to a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week emergency monitoring call center. That's all they do all day long is sit and wait for calls to come in from devices such as this. Another landline phone or another cell phone cannot call to this device. It's one way with the care center. So basically the way that it works is a customer will purchase this device. They'll activate it on our network, very similar to any other cell phone. And that's a very important feature and mention. This is what's referred to in the industry as a PERS device, a personal emergency response device. There are others in the market. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the names of them. Traditionally, those solutions are though homebound. So an individual needs to be within range of their docking station when they press the button in order to connect for help. Our device works both in the home, and it also works nationwide on our wireless network. What I think is the best about this is, the seniors that we have today, the baby boomers, are much more active individuals than in past generations, and they have much more active lifestyles. So we like the fact that we're giving them the ability to continue to live that sort of lifestyle and still have the sense of safety and security that if something were to occur or they need help, that it's just the press of a button.
If you take nothing away from this activity today, make sure you think about yourself as a caregiver and take care of yourself. Yes, it's important to take care of those people that you're responsible for, but you can't do that if you're in a hospital. You can't do that. So you have to take care of yourself in order to be a good caregiver. And so I've just got a couple of lessons, and there was a handout on the table this morning, hopefully you got it, about caregiver survival tips. Learn all about your family member's medical condition and the risks and benefits of treatment choices, what's likely to happen in the future, and what do you need to know to make sure that the best choices are being made. You probably have to speak with several different doctors to get all of the information. And you have to probably remember to ask questions. There is no stupid question. Ask questions. If you don't understand something, please tell me again. What does that mean? What do I have to do? I had an opportunity to meet a couple who had taken care of both of their parents. They were doing a caregiver video for us, as a matter of fact. And they showed me a notebook that they had put together. And it was just marvelous. Every piece of information about the doctor's appointments, all the medications that were being taken and the doses, and it was all there in this notebook that they had organized so that if anything happened to either one of them, somebody else could come in, a son or daughter who didn't live there could come in and pick this up and see, oh, okay, this is what happens, this is when this happens, this is what, and so keeping information, not just in your head, is also an important thing to do. Plan ahead. Be good to yourself. Take time for leisure. It's okay for you to go to the movies. It's okay for you to go to church on Sunday if that's something that refreshes and revitalizes you. Just make plans for someone else to come in and help so you can do those kinds of things. And then share your feelings with others. It's okay to be tired and frustrated, and it's important to talk about that. You, as a caregiver, also have needs, and I think what you've learned here today is how to get help, how to take care of yourself, how to be a better caregiver. What we want all of you to do as you leave here today is to take this message and what you've learned and share it. Share it widely with everyone you can, people that you work with, people in your church, people in your social circles. Share this information. It's important for everybody to understand because you never know when you'll be the caregiver.
For more information about resources that are available for caregivers and other seniors, feel free to visit our website at www.ncba-aged.org.